This is Euronews Now. Here are your headlines. Eastern Ukraine sees its worst shelling in years as both sides accuse each other of ceasefire violations. The West says it fears Russia is preparing a pretext to invade. US President Biden hosts a call with NATO allies to discuss the Ukraine crisis as Washington says it believes Russia's now amassed 190,000 troops at the border. Storm Eunice slams northern Europe with some of the highest wind speeds on record, with roofs blown off houses and flights grounded. And soaring above the competition, Eileen Hu makes Olympic history, scoring her third medal of the Games with another gold. I'm Helena Humphrey. Good to have you with us. There's been more shelling in eastern Ukraine along a tense line of contact separating the army and Russia-backed separatists. Both sides have been trading accusations over who is responsible for the exchange of fire. The shelling that started on Thursday hit a local school and several houses. Security monitors have reported more than 500 explosions. President Vladimir Putin, who was meeting his Belarusian counterpart in Moscow, says that Russia is monitoring the situation. Well, Sasha Vakulina, who is in Kiev, says Ukraine denies it has any plan of an offensive operation in the Donbass area.
The situation unfortunately escalated even more when this afternoon the heads of Russia-backed separatist states in Ukraine announced a mass evacuation of citizens, saying that they fear that Ukraine might be planning an attack. There is no indication that Ukraine has any plans for offensive operation in the southeast of the country. This was confirmed by the country's defense minister and also by the foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba, who said that Ukraine does not conduct or plan any such actions in the Donbass area. We're fully committed to diplomatic conflict resolution. There was also the announcement by Ukraine's general-in-chief addressing the people who live there in those self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic. He said, do not believe the lies. You are being accused to escalate the situation and unleash a new bloodbath. And of course, over the past few days, we've heard the claims of the Western leaders that Russia has not withdrawn the troops and the country might be planning a false flag attack to justify more offensive or even an invasion.
Sasha, it is an important weekend coming up where you are there in Kiev at the anniversary of the killing of protesters on the Maidan in 2014. And I think it's fair to say that 8 years on, for many Ukrainians, the struggle goes on. So how will that anniversary be marked there?
Indeed, the 18th, the 19th and the 20th of February of 2014 were some of the saddest and the bloodiest days in Ukraine's history. And every year there are commemorations in the country, all over the country, marking the memory of those more than 100 people killed and more than 2,500 injured of those. But of course, the whole situation, the commemorations of these dates have a different meaning this year with everything that's been happening at Ukraine's borders and in the east. And I talked today to Ilya Ponomarenko, who is the defense reporter at the Kiev Independent, asking him, now, 8 years from those Maidan bloodiest days, what is the message that Ukrainians would send to the Western leaders?
The message to them would be that you should not be tempted into going the easiest way, because when it comes to this solving this conflict, because it's been a strategy for the Kremlin to tempt Western leaders, establishment, to go in the easiest way, just to give up on Ukraine, just forget what we have done in Europe over the last few years, just give up and close your eyes and let's continue business as usual. It's like, to hell with Ukraine, let's continue business as usual.
The anti-governmental protests in 2014, of course, were some of the strongest pro-European protests ever held, and now 8 years on, the Ukrainians do feel as much strong about joining the EU and the NATO.
Meanwhile, there are warnings from US officials that Russia has massed some 190,000 troops along Ukraine's borders. It is the biggest military build-up in Europe since World War II and nearly double the number since the end of last month. Seeing no signs of a promised Russian withdrawal, US President Joe Biden discussed the crisis with NATO allies and European leaders in a phone call on Friday. And our reporter in Washington, D.C., Ray Suarez, says for the US, keeping up the pressure is the only way to deal with Russia.
They seem to have taken the decision that the best way to handle Russia and Vladimir Putin is to never turn down the temperature and never turn down the pressure. So when Russia makes bland assertions about pulling back from the border, demobilizing troops, the United States goes public immediately with satellite photographs and other evidence saying, no, they're increasing the number of troops on the border. They're not decreasing them. He is keeping up the pressure both publicly and privately while the administration is in a full court press. We just saw Vice President Harris in Munich with Jens Stoltenberg. Today, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, confirmed that he's going to meet his Russian opposite number, Sergei Lavrov, in Europe next week. And as you mentioned, Joe Biden will be talking with the allies. When Chancellor Scholz of Germany was here in Washington, the president was absolutely certain that if there was any violation of Ukraine's borders, another violation of Ukraine's borders by Russia, Nord Stream 2 simply would not happen. He was categorical. And the German chancellor wouldn't be. Now, Germany coming in behind the United States saying, yes, Nord Stream 2 would be halted by such an invasion. So the United States seems to have made up its mind the only way to deal with Russia in this situation is to be loud, keep the pressure on, and keep the allies in line. Helena?
Ray, yes, indeed. And of course, the United States is now currently talking to NATO allies in a call. So what course of action can we expect from them if this does go one step further and we see a further invasion of Ukraine?
Well, the United States, both quietly and loudly, has said that it would not involve NATO military action to aid Ukraine. So what have they done as secondary measures? Continue to stress how much this will hurt Russia, Russians, and Vladimir Putin himself and the oligarchs who help keep him in power if, in fact, there is another violation of Ukrainian sovereignty. This will take the form of economic measures. Economic measures, let's remember that some of the allies were not too happy about when they were first speculated about here in Washington. They will take the form of increased NATO troop emplacements in places like the Baltic republics and in eastern Poland. You know, Belarus is talking about those Russian exercises coming up. That borders 3 NATO states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. The temperature doesn't seem to be on its way to going down anytime soon. If Putin and the Russians continue on the course, it seems clear that Joe Biden intends to make them pay and make them pay heavy.
Well, Bruno Lette is a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund with a focus on security and defence. And he says the events that we're witnessing are about creating a pretext for Russia to intervene.
It is clear that Russia and Russian-led forces in the Donbass are escalating now, probably because the Kremlin considers the diplomatic outcomes of last week as not satisfactory. So I think the coming days will unfortunately bring more military incidents, more hybrid attacks and disinformation. Clearly, I think what we're seeing right now, the shelling from the Donbass, the disinformation, those are acts designed to create a pretext for an intervention. Look, in 8 years of war since 2014, Ukraine has never, ever attempted to take back the Donbass military. So why would Ukraine now, when there are 190,000 Russian troops on the border, try to retake the Donbass? This clearly doesn't make sense. So the events that we are seeing right now are really, it's about creating a fake situation here that would allow Russia and the Russian-backed forces in the Donbass to intervene in sovereign Ukrainian territory, unfortunately. So I think that the drumbeat of provocations is sounding louder, and we cannot exclude that a military conflict erupts in the next coming hours and days.
Yeah, just to be clear, are you saying that this is potentially a false flag operation that we're seeing right now?
I think this is exactly, the building of a false flag operation. Yes, all the signs are there. They are, as I said, the Ukraine is only engaging diplomatically. Ukraine is not provoking. The armed forces of Ukraine are not shooting, are not shelling. So all what we see right now are, is a creation of a situation to create a pretext. And that is exactly what we are seeing happening in front of us.
After 2 days of talks in Brussels, leaders from the European and African unions have agreed to lay the groundwork for a fresh start between the two blocs. But they failed to make a breakthrough on intellectual property rights for COVID vaccines and treatments. Shona Murray reports.
Relations have evolved for the better and the ground has been laid for a renewed partnership between Europe and Africa. That's the message leaders from both continents conveyed during a long-awaited summit held in Brussels. And that's what the chairman of the African Union, Macky Sall, told Euronews.
Often we were not listening to. We were just given recipes, solutions. I note a fundamental paradigm shift in the relationship, built on friendship, consideration, mutual listening, and the search for common solutions, the co-construction of solutions.
But there are still significant pending issues, such as Europe's continued refusal to waive intellectual property rights for the COVID vaccine.
Intellectual property is a powerful lever to promote innovation and research, and it is supposed to protect this dimension.
Nonetheless, African and European leaders have agreed to continue discussing to try to find meaningful solutions to this issue. They'll meet again in April to try to solve it.
It's not a failure at all, as there are two opposing positions. We try to find a compromise.
This compromise might start with today's confirmation that 6 African countries will receive the necessary technology to produce mRNA vaccines. Also in the economic field, the European Commission has proposed a €150 million fund for investment in infrastructure projects focusing on green energy and transport interconnection in Africa. Brussels denies this is in order to balance the Chinese and Russian influence already on the continent.
The will of the EU is not to counter someone's influence, it is to develop a positive project.
No less than 70 delegations were present in Brussels for the summit. There were 3 absent, though: Mali, Burkina Faso and Guinea, after the recent coups. Shona Murray, Euronews, Brussels.